Let's turn tonight to Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6. Let's read together what Paul wrote in Colossians 4 and verse 6. Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. I get amused at times when people can't understand a conversation and the news media wants to know what's really being said, or when they say something and somebody wants to break it down, and so they're trying to decide what they really mean by what they say, and so they'll get some body language expert in there. And that expert watches the body language and says, well, he didn't really mean this, or she didn't mean this or that, because look at their body language. And I have no doubt in my mind that our body language says a lot. You can tell when somebody's uncomfortable in a conversation if you watch, and if you pay attention, oftentimes you can tell if somebody's lying. Now, I have known folks in my life that the way to tell if they were lying was if their mouth was moving. If their lips moved, they simply were lying. That was just how they lived their life. But there are other people that we can look at, and when they say something, we can put that down in stone. It's absolute. And you can be guaranteed that their yea means yea, and their nay means nay. But Paul's message here in this verse is about our speech. Oftentimes when we speak, our speech, our language is bold and it's positive. And somebody listens to what we say and they say, boy, they're really on fire. But when we get down to the reality, their actions differ from what they say. Jesus said about the religious leaders of his day in Matthew 15 and verse 8, these people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. So the fact is, we actually give to others the exact same thing that we give to God. If we talk about being this and this and this and this with God, and we do otherwise, then that's the same thing we do to our fellow man. The same image that we project to God with our actions projects to those around us. You can deceive people for a certain amount of time with great pious actions or words. You can do things that seem so honorable and say things that seem so righteous and so religious, but sooner or later, our lack of consistency is going to catch us. We say that we love God, but we never obey God. Or we say that we love God, or we obey God in some things, but we don't dedicate ourselves in obedience to God in all things. Now, James said, whoso keepeth the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. He was talking about the law of Moses, but if we consistently with our actions disobey God, it doesn't matter what we say. God already has us figured out long before anybody else does, and eventually in time, everyone else is going to know by our actions that we are not what we say that we are. We are not what we claim to be. We are not willing to demonstrate what we are. It doesn't matter what we say. Our heart is far from God. The wise man Solomon said, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. What does that mean? As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. That verse really truly says exactly what we just said. We can speak whatever we want to speak, but as we think in our heart, that's how our actions are going to demonstrate the kind of person that we really are. And we can't fool people for very long. We can fool some, but we can't fool everybody. And we're never going to fool God, and we're never going to be able to have any real credibility because of our actions in reaching those that are lost. Especially those that are closest to us, because they know us better than anybody else does. So instead of being like these people that Jesus talked about, who draweth nigh unto me with their mouth and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, let's be the kind of people that put together with our words The kind of actions that say, I belong to the King Jesus. And I am serious about my salvation, and I want you to be serious about your salvation. That's the way we lead. We lead by example. The pattern that we are supposed to follow is simple to identify. We just simply look at the example we find in Jesus Christ, who Peter said in Acts 10 and verse 38, went about doing good. In Hebrews chapter 11, or chapter 12, in the first 3 verses, the writer talked about, let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus as the author and finisher of our faith. But before he said that, he said, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and then let us run with patience. You can't run the race until you lay aside. And you can't have any credibility until you lay aside. Because everybody knows in reality the race that you're actually running. The race that is run with Jesus looks unto Jesus not only as the author but the finisher of our faith. And the race that is run with Jesus lays aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us. There are things that hinder us from running. We need to work on those problems. There is a solution, but the solution lies within every one of us. It's up to me to work out my own salvation with fear and trembling. Do you worry about the souls of others? Most certainly you do if you're a Christian. Do I worry about the souls of others? Certainly, most certainly I do. If I'm a Christian, if I'm a gospel preacher, if I'm an elder, I'm going to worry about the souls of others. Paul wrote to the church of Colossians, he said to them, I stand in doubt of you. Because their actions were different from what they professed to be. When I look at you and I see you and I love you, believe that. When I see your actions be less than what your words say you are, I have to say I stand in doubt of you. Because I'm concerned about your soul. So what we want to do is, we want to not be the kind of people that draw nigh with our mouth, nor the kind of people that honor with our lips, but we want to keep hearts that are drawn close to God, because as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. That's where our actions come from, the inside. We're going to do what we really believe we want to do. When the time comes, when the dust settles, we're not going to be forced to do something that's against our inner man. No matter what we say with our mouth, we can make all the promises in the world, but if I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. Jesus went about doing good, setting us a pattern. The reason we need to understand this is important is because grace can be abused. We live under a system of grace. The gospel is a system of grace. Grace can be abused. God is the extender of all grace. Paul writes in Ephesians 1 and verse 2 and says, grace be to you and peace. And then he defines where it comes from when he says, from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. Personal abuse and allowing ourselves to take advantage of God's grace toward us means that we are walking on thin ice. We're separated from God. We just hadn't figured it out yet. Forgiveness is never a license for us to sin personally. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Romans chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. So, can we be saved absent of grace? Absolutely not. But grace is not a free meal ticket for us to abuse and use simply because we are not willing to change. Simply because we're not willing to walk in the light. If you shine a light in a dark place, there's one place where the light is strong, and then there's a shadow to the side. step outside the shadow and there's total darkness. It's dangerous to walk out there where there's a shadow to the side because nothing is clear. We can only see clearly the path that God has set before us when we stay within the perimeters of that light. Everything just outside that light is darkness. There are degrees of darkness, just as there are degrees of light. But God sheds on us a light that is abundantly clear. We can question in our minds all we want about where the line is, where's that fine line, where's that gray area. We don't want to walk in the gray area, do we? We are supposed to be children of light. We're supposed to walk in the light. But if you walk in the light as He is in the light, then we have fellowship one with another. The blood of His Son, Jesus Christ, cleanses us from every sin. But only when we walk in the light. He is the light, in Him is no darkness at all. But wait. I'm a child of the light. If it can be said of Jesus that He is the light, in Him there is no darkness at all, we need to get rid of the dark things in our life that keep that light from shining and giving the glory that God demands that we give Him. We shine not because of ourselves, but we shine because that light that we put forth is the way and the means that some folks have to see God. It is our walking in the light that encourages people to learn more about God. It is our pattern that is the pattern that Jesus has established that causes people to glorify not us, but glorify our Father which is in heaven. You are the only glimpse of Jesus Christ that some people will ever see in this life. I'm the only glimpse that some people will ever see of Jesus Christ in this life. Why in the world would I want to hover in the darkness, in the shadows? Why would I want to conceal? I'll tell you why. Because this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Paul said in Ephesians 2 and verse 8, for by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. That grace that God extends toward us is the only way in the world that you and I can hope to be saved. Absent of grace, all are lost. But as God has given us grace, we must also not only walk in the light and not abuse that grace, but we must also extend that grace to those around us. We do that by our example, by our actions. Not just by our words, but by our actions. It is by grace that God abundantly pardons every one of us. It is by grace, through this system of grace, that God provides for us forgiveness. And Jesus is the absolute manifestation of God's grace for mankind. Let's turn just a minute to John chapter 1. And let's go down to verse 10 and let's read together through verse 18. In verse 9, John the Baptist is talking here. He's talking about Jesus. He says, that was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came into his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bare witness of him and cried, saying, This was he of whom I spake. He that cometh after me is preferred before me, for he was before me. And of his fullness have we all received, and grace for grace. For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. What does this mean? In Jesus Christ, we see a different side of God. Think about that. Before, what did we see? What did we see of the God in Noah's day? Well, in Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 7, listen to what Moses recorded in those days. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made man. It doesn't sound like a God of grace, does it? But then, in verse 8, Genesis chapter 6, we see that other side of God, just a glimpse. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. In Egypt, the children of Israel had been in bondage for 430 years. That's many generations, Mackenzie. They've been oppressed because the Egyptians were hard taskmasters. But God did not forget his people. And God extended to them grace through Moses when Moses came as their deliverer. And Moses was a type of Christ. So many things about Moses are like Christ that we see. He's their prophet. He's their leader. He's their lawgiver. He is their intercessor. He goes between them and God and makes intercession. God was going to destroy that entire nation on one occasion and raise up a family, a generation through Moses that would serve him. And Moses stood by their side and made intercession, and God's grace was extended. We see glimpses of God's grace in the Old Testament. In the time of Judges, in those days, there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. We learn of a woman named Deborah. We learn of a man named Gideon. Of Gideon, the Bible says in Judges 6 and verse 17, he said unto him, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. That's Gideon addressing God. And God is gracious. He gave him not one, but a total of 5 different signs showing him his grace. That's God's grace in action. But to me, in the story in Judges about Gideon, even the greatest sign was the sign of God's grace in delivering with 300 individuals, 300 fighting men, the defeat of an army of 135,000 Midianites. If that's not grace, I don't know what is. And God had instructed Gideon to bring down his army from 32,000 to 300 so that God's grace might be demonstrated. So that the children of Israel might embrace this grace that God gave to them, and so that the enemies of God would know that Israel only prevailed because they served the true and living God. Here's a glimpse of God's grace. Israel as a whole, in their history of 1,500 years, were about rebellion, and they were about bondage. And they were about deliverance. God's grace is demonstrated throughout, but it was never deserved. They were a rebellious people. They were adulterous. They would be swayed any way the wind blew. And they married outside of where they were supposed to marry. They polluted the land with different kinds of groves and different kinds of service to different kinds of gods. God delivered them into bondage twice, Assyrian captivity, Babylonian captivity. The captivity of Assyria caused 10 tribes to be lost completely because of their rebellion. They did not retain their identity. God's grace remained. He continued to bless them with unmerited favor. But think about grace. God has extended His grace to us. What are we going to do with it? We need to use it to our advantage. So what are we going to do with it? But then there's another part of that, another side of that is just as essential. Our willingness to embrace the grace that God has extended to us, but also our willingness to take this same grace that God has extended to us and extend it to those around us. That's valuable. That's how you and I are able to reach folks. By being gracious enough to demonstrate in our lives that we believe God's promises, we have faith. Our faith is demonstrated in our actions. We have embraced His grace. The evidence of that grace is demonstrated in our actions. Not what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? How many times could we say that before it sinks in? Why dare we stand in jeopardy every hour? We've been forgiven. We've been saved by faith through grace. For by grace are you saved through faith. And that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. Somebody said, yeah. Somebody wronged me. There's somebody that you and I know that made every wrong choice that can be made. There's somebody that you and I know that made a mess in every way of their lives. There's somebody that you and I know who destroyed every good relationship that they once had. And so that means there's somebody that you and I know that has so much to overcome. Let me ask you a question. When you think about the worst of the worst of the worst, how much is too much before we can be forgiven? Is there a magic number that exists somewhere that we haven't discovered yet, that somebody's approaching that number? And when they get there, we're going to say, whoa, stop the presses, we're done. Nothing else to say, nothing else can be done. They've crossed the line. Jesus' disciples thought that way, and He told them if a man transgressed against them 70 times, 7 times in a day, and comes to you and says, I repent, He said, forgive him. He's talking about the same transgression. He's not talking about doing 490 different things. He's talking about doing one thing 490 times. As if we didn't have to be forgiven. As if God has not extended His grace to us. As if we have not forgotten and abused the grace of God. As if we stand in jeopardy and we take chances with our soul and we gamble with our salvation as we walk in the edge of the light over in the shadows. You know the only thing that's scared of the light? Decent things and decent folks are not afraid of the light. Vermin, roaches, rats, things like that fear the light. I remember one time years ago, we were staying in a place in Arkansas. And we had rented that place, and it was over the water. It was on Lake Greasy. And it looked so good on the outside. And we go inside, and it hangs out over the lake. And we go inside, and when you walk through and you look down the cracks in the floor, you can see the water 25 feet below. And the stuff they had in there for furniture went back to the 20s. And most of it was homemade, and you had them old ceramic style cabinets in there. Well, the kids were hungry. There was nowhere to eat around there, and a little old store there. And I went over and got 2 or 3 cans of Viennese sausage, and they ate them. And we left, and we came back. When I turned on the light, all 3 of them cans of Viennese were solid black because there was roaches down in them. And they scurried for the dark, and we grabbed our stuff and we left. We're not afraid of the light, are we? We're not scared of the light, are we? Don't we fear the darkness more? Because the darkness is a place where those things that we don't want to think about, those things that we don't want to know about take place. We avoid those things of darkness because we are children of light. And we don't have to decide what we're going to do because we've already made up our mind. Now that I'm involved in my salvation and I'm taking advantage of God's grace, I've already made up my mind. Those decisions are already made and done. I shouldn't have to toy with that every day. I shouldn't have to think about that every day. That ought to be a done deal. It ought to be one of those things we've put a scotch behind that tire and now we're moving on. We put a period at the end of that sentence, and now we're moving ahead. But we were talking about somebody else. We're not talking about me. I've been forgiven. We're not talking about you. You've been forgiven. We're talking about somebody else that made a mess and did every wrong thing in the world. How much is too much? I know how much is too much with me. Because in my weakness, oftentimes, I don't want to forgive. If somebody comes to you and asks to be forgiven, you've got one option. You've got 2 choices. But one option if you want to be right. And that is to forgive them. The other option is to not forgive them, and then you're going to have to give account to God. Because I happen to know for a fact that too much with God does not exist. How much is too much with me has nothing to do with how much is too much with God. If we are willing to embrace the truth and make a change, and we can, God is willing to forgive us. They can be forgiven. I can be forgiven. Perhaps they have too much for me to overcome, and now all of a sudden it's become my problem and not theirs. Because what we all need most of all, if we ask that question, what we might say, and I believe this would be the correct answer, is a chance. But somebody says, you don't understand, they've had chance after chance after chance after chance. Maybe so. But am I willing to jeopardize their soul and my own soul when in reality maybe this time is different? Maybe they're sincere about making a change. Or would I not be better served by being like God? If you had to pick one word to define God, what word would that be? The Apostle John's already got it for us. John declared God is love. Now, everything that encompasses is very simple to understand. It's mercy. God is merciful. It's easy to understand. It's grace. God is full of grace. And God is above all the God of a second chance because God's the God of the second mile. Jesus said, whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. The first mile is forced under Roman law. If I was a Roman soldier, I could come up to any one of you and make you carry all of my hardware, however much it was, whatever it weighed, it didn't matter. I could make you carry it a mile, and you were compelled by law to go a mile. Jesus said, when they come to you and they say that, he said, go with him 2 miles. The second mile. Whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. The first mile is forced. The second mile, that's a mile of love. That's a mile of tenderness. That's where we demonstrate compassion. That's where we demonstrate that, like God, we are willing to be gracious. And we do that not only with those that are like us, because those are the easy ones to carry along, but we do that with those who are different from us, because the real test is here. It's not hard to love somebody that loves you. Even the world, even the vilest sinner there is, loves those that love them. 30 years ago or better, I watched a program about a man they called the Iceman. Do you remember, anybody remember him? He was a hit man for the mob. And he made a lot of folks disappear. And I can't remember his name. It was like a Polish name or something, but they did an interview on him. He was the most horrible human being I ever saw in an interview in my life. He hated everybody. He had no regard for human life. He said one night he had a contract on a guy Christmas Eve. He said, I went to him and said he hadn't paid the money he was supposed to pay. And said, my job was to kill him. He said, that guy sat there and pleaded with me and begged me not to take his life. He had a wife and children. It was Christmas Eve. Could you just give me a break? I'll get the money. And he told him, he said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. It's all taken care of. And he turned back and he said, I shot him. And he said, I did what I did with him. You know why they called him the Iceman? When he killed somebody, he would take them to a storage freezer and he'd freeze their bodies, Terry. And he'd keep that body frozen for a year, and then he'd take it somewhere and dump it. Well, that way, he's in the clear, see? They think the guy's just killed. He's got an alibi. And some forensic guy somewhere noticed when he was doing the autopsy, it didn't completely thaw out, and he saw some ice crystals inside the guy's chest cavity in his blood or something like that. He saw, and so they didn't know who he was yet, but they identified him as the Iceman. And I watched this guy talk about killing people in this interview for an hour as if they were just animals. He said, I don't think anymore about killing somebody that with a dog. That's what he said. And then all of a sudden he started talking about his wife and his child. And I watched this guy tear up. And asked him if he had any regrets. He said, yeah, I regret that my wife and my son have to know what I am. And he started crying. So see, even those who love no one else, a man who had no regard for human life, who had no compassion, no mercy, looked at human beings as just a source of income that he was going to take out of the way, loved those that loved him. The real test is in loving everybody. We learn to love everybody. We begin to embrace God's grace, and we start walking in the light. That's going to be a real place of change, real change in me. I'm not going to be hit and miss anymore. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to be somebody that can be depended on. I'm going to be somebody that's going to set the proper example because I'm trying to be like Jesus. And now I have a genuine opportunity of change for those around me. And as I said, real grace is manifest not just in word, but in actions. One of my favorite verses is in 1 John 3 and verse 18. My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Is John saying, don't ever love in word, don't ever love with your tongue? That's not what he's saying. He said, don't let it be just that. Let it be in deed and in truth. Let's extend ourselves into action. Extend ourselves into embracing God's graciousness. Embrace the spirit of forgiveness that God has provided for us, and let us learn to become for others someone who's easily entreated and willing to forgive. But if you really, truly want to show that you have embraced God's grace, you need to start acting like you're in His grace. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. God forbid. How shall we that are supposed to be dead to sin live any longer therein? The father of the prodigal we talked about the other day is God. To show His grace. In Luke 15 and verse 20, when the prodigal decided to return. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. That's the mindset of God. And this young man had the right mindset. I will arise and go to my father and say to my father, I have sinned in my father's house. There's bread and enough to spare. I'm no more worthy. Make me one of your hired servants and I'll do what I'm supposed to do. I'll walk in the light, Daddy. That's what he said. I'll walk in the light. I'll be what you need me to be. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Because Paul said, if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he's none of his. And Christ suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow in his steps. Philippians 2 and verse 5, Romans 8 and verse 9, 1 Peter 2 and verse 21. And remember, words matter, but actions speak louder than words. Now, we can all hear what you say. Let's all see what we can do. Because that's the only way that we're not only going to get to heaven, but that's the only way we're going to make a difference to those that we come in contact with when we begin to act like we really and truly love God. If you have a need to respond anyway tonight to the invitation, come now. Father, give us family.